Now, recently, Alan Wake 2 has been kind of just blowing up. It's doing really good numbers and it's getting great reviews, which is absurd in this era of 2023 when there's just so many incredible games coming out this year. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. It's absolutely just mind-numbingly. If there is an end of the world where everything's freaking awesome and a crescendo of amazing entertainment, that we are there. We have arrived with so many incredible games coming out this year. But with Alan Wake 2 having just come out, I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Whoa, 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 whoa. I haven't finished Alan Wake 1, bro. So I went back and I played all the way through Alan Wake 1. Now, what's really good about Alan Wake 1 is, one, it's a kind of a game designed in the past. And I love this. I love games that were designed during this era of time, right around what I would say is like 2006 to like 2015. Like that era of time is absolutely one of my favorite eras of time because it was before this era of DLC or online service games. And this is a really raw single player. I don't want to call it survival horror, but there are aspects of survival horror in it in the sense that you are limited in your ammunition. You have a unique gameplay mechanic with this game whereby these shadowy figures are pursuing you through the Pacific Northwest, a small town called Bright Falls. This is a writer's game. This is a creative madman's game. This is a game that was ahead of its time. And in many ways, I would say that during this period of time, it was like there were a couple of these guys, these dudes, these writers that thought, video games can have a really artistic narrative as well. And while, the game certainly does spend a good amount of time sniffing its own farts about how artistic it is, it actually does it does a very good job of creating this hero that's very unique and a identity that's very unique. Now, I'm certainly very excited to play Alan Wake 2. I haven't gone to that, because I'm still, I just finished Alan Wake 1. And to give you full clarity, I played through the entire remastered version on the PS4. And what this is basically it includes also the two additional chapters. There's a chapter called The Signal and the chapter called The Writer. And I've finished both of them. And the last one was pretty tough. Now, there will be some spoilers because this is a very narrative-driven story. There's essentially a really interesting setting. It borders on open world while simultaneously trying to deliver a very narrative-driven story. And what I mean by that is there are moments in the game whereby you get a lot of flexibility, a lot of like, hey, I'm going to roam around. I'm going to go check out that weird-looking cabin. Or I'm going to go and explore that bridge that was destroyed before, or take that alternate path that in your backtracking that I didn't see before, and you might go off on that little tangent and it might give you a whole different line of dialogue from the writer. It's a lot of the story is being told to you through the eyes of the author. And when I say the author is the hero. I mean, that is a unique setup for a heroic character. The story is essentially about a character named Alan Wake, who is a sort of a bit of a celebrity author, which, how does that happen? Well, let's see. I guess he bought a lot of New York Times best-selling author credits to get himself the top writer's credit. But whatever the case, he's a famous writer, and he goes to this small town with his wife, and he has a sort of a manic, weird, pathological breakdown where he can't write and his wife is pushing him to write. So he goes into this little weird cabin that doesn't exist, but it kind of exists. And then she gets kidnapped and he believes that he lets her die. And he's finding pages of a manuscript that he didn't write, but because he blacked out for a week, it's possible that he did write it. And so we're left with the question throughout the whole game. One, who are these mysterious shadowy creatures that I have to shine my flashlight on before I can shoot them? And two, who's this creepy old lady who seems to be masterminding some kind of a transdimensional portal that's sucked my girlfriend or wife into this other dimension whereby some mysterious version of myself is rewriting a story that involves some kind of dramatic rescue attempt from this other said shadow dimension. Okay, there's a lot of nods, I would say, to Stephen King type of stories, such as Carrie, I believe. I believe that was the name of the film, and the novel. I said the film. That's going to piss off some serious Stephen King fans out there. But I like Stephen King. I've only read one book, which is his book on writing specifically, which he wrote after an incident where he nearly died. But whatever the case, this game really does echo a lot of his sort of writing style and his kind of personality. And so it's very clear that Sam Lake, the writer of this game, is a big Stephen King fan, and he has a very marketable name. So it's no doubt that at this point in history, he probably will become known after writing Control and the Alan Wake series. He probably will become known as the Stephen King of the video game industry, which I don't begrudge. You know, the guy actually does have a really good sense of bougie kind of artsy fartsy kind of writing, and also he has some very creative ideas. So for instance, you get these very surreal moments whereby you have a character named Zane, who was another writer who was caught up in a similar kind of a transdimensional kerfluffle years ago, and he appears in a diving suit for God knows what reason why, and he appears sort of floating around you with light beams blasting out of his helmet, and that sort of gives you this beacon, this kind of like an idea that you are the light in the darkness, and you're being guided by this other light in the darkness that's trying to give some sense, some rails, and some method of narrative instruction as to what is happening to the main character as he's going through what he considers to be potentially a psychological breakdown, and which is also confirmed and questioned by another character who actually plays a psychotherapist who's supposed to be helping you through this mental breakdown that the main character is going through. But the ending is certainly a nice reward, and it certainly creates this nice backdrop and an interesting sort of Twin Peaks kind of a odd weirdness that is unforgettable and unmistakably unique, and in a way that I almost feel like you have to be a little bit of a psychotic egomaniac to put yourself into your game. And what I mean by that is just that these are not new concepts, but they're presented in a way that sort of makes you wonder what is going on. And while I would like to assume that there is more going on, we really don't, without the context of the game Control and Alan Wake 2, we really can't know. And perhaps I would like to hope, and I would like to dream, and I would like to think and imagine that potentially the creator or the writer, Sam Lake, who wrote this story, has some place where he's trying to explain that this dark place actually comes from, and if we were to look at it in the context of the entire series, which, as we said before, Control is a sequel, semi-sequel to the Alan Wake, or I don't want to say sequel, it's a direct tie-in to the universe of Alan Wake. And I'd like to think that there are actual explanations in there, but they're sort of obtuse. And that when I talk about self-flatulating, and when I talk about self-grandizing, and when I talk about sniffing its own farts, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Now, as a writer and somebody who has not met with nearly as much success as a writer and a creative, I will say some of it is just envy that people even give a damn, because there's a sort of a line you have to walk whereby you are so obtuse and going into your own line of thinking that you're dropping hints to things that are just visually stimulating and curious without having to offer up any actual logical, rational reason as to how or why that actually works. But people buy into it and they're curious about it from the trailers. And this is the same kind of a thing that I would criticize Kojima for, but while simultaneously I also admire, because how in the fuck does anybody care? But at the same time, I care. How in the hell did they get me to care? And yet at the same time, there are no answers. So I have to look at the whole thing as very entertaining, sort of like listening to if you've spent any time in San Francisco talking to people who are a little bit, let's just say, mentally divergent, who meander through the streets of San Francisco, you might have a glimpse of the kind of thinking that is involved here. Now, at the same time, it sounds like I'm being extremely critical, but what I will say is that it is a unique and interesting sort of delve into a rather peculiar and interesting writer's mind. Now, this is a writer who loves the written word. And I think to some degree, in order to be a writer in the modern era, you have to be in love with your own words. You have to be in love with your own thoughts, your own way of expressing a simple thing. And the game does a good job at times in doing exactly that. I will say, however, that maybe it's due to the era, maybe it's due to the actor, the performance, maybe it's due to something in the translation. There are times when the voice actor's delivery is somewhat questionable, why the odd pauses here and there? It feels unnatural at times. And there are times when, as a person who's done some voice acting, amateur voice acting on some games in the past, I can honestly say I can really detect it when a writer is sort of reading a dialogue and putting emphasis in the wrong place. And I noticed that several times whilst playing Alan Wake. But I will say the setting is extremely interesting. The sound design, very interesting. This definitely feels like a studio that is still finding their identity, but they have a compulsion to know where they'd like to go. And that really paid off with their latter game, Control, and apparently with Alan Wake 2, which, again, I'm very eager to play. But with my backlog currently, there is not much of a chance for me to get to that anytime, particularly soon. But I do want to do it while this is still fresh in my mind, because there are so many questions. There are so many things that I would love to know an answer to. But, here's another thing I want to point out. I love J.J. Abrams' old movies. I love Lost. I love the Cloverfield series. More questions than answers. And in fact, there was an interview where J.J. Abrams said, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but it seems to be at play here as well, this technique, this tactic, which by the way, as a person who's a creative, I have to write games, I have to write stories, and I have to find ways to keep viewers and readers engaged throughout. And so I'm always analyzing, how the fuck did they do that? And the trick that they're using here to get to the point is the box with the big question mark on it. What is the dark place? Where is Alan Wake at the end of this game? Where is, and who is this entity? And how the fuck are they taking control over the dark place? I want to know. I want to know if this is another dimension. I want to know if this is some entity within that dimension. I want to know if they delve. I mean, I really hope they stay away from spiritual things, because this is some seriously evil, dark stuff that this character is dealing with here. And maybe it's just purely symbolic. And if you were to look at it from a purely symbolic standpoint, which a writer is apt to do, for example, then you would just see it as literally a battle between light and dark, which on its surface is interesting and compelling. I mean, that flashlight mechanic is not anywhere else. You have to kind of like blast these zombie-like shadowy figures with light to wear them down before they're even vulnerable to bullets. I mean, that certainly is almost like a shield, right? From a gameplay mechanic standpoint, it's just a shield. There was some really neat tech that they were doing. And if I recall correctly, Remedy Studios was one of the first studios to really utilize this technology of Unreal Engine 4, which is the game engine that Twilight Monk is being developed in, by the way. But in this particular engine, they do this, and in this particular game as well, they do this thing where they'll have like a whole forest just suddenly start shaking and swaying in the wind, and a big hurricane comes through and just like starts lifting stuff up and ripping it off of the ground. So there's a lot of environment manipulation. There's a lot of like walking through a door and then you turn around and the corridor that you just walked through looks like a totally different location entirely. So you're portaling around through all these different places. And that's a really interesting kind of a way to structure a game like this that's so grounded in reality. I will say there's a serious lack of interesting monsters. You're basically just dealing with rednecks out in the woods that have glowing eyes and dark, shadowy kind of movements. You've got some characters that are cloaking throughout the forest as they're rushing all around you. You've got a lot of, like at one point, you're literally fighting floating barrels. I mean, physical objects are just being flung at you. And that can be a little bit, let's just say, as an artist, it's like, I'd like to go a little bit more interesting with things usually. But being that they're trying to make a game that's really grounded like this, hey, it fits its universe, it fits its identity, and it is a horror story. And especially if they're trying to be taken seriously, this is the kind of game that a non-gamer might even pick up. And I'll tell you, with the different difficulty modes, that's not a bad idea. It's curious. It's the sort of a thing that gives you just enough breadcrumbs to make you wonder what the hell's happening next. And with the relationships between characters and the constant sort of like flashing back to previous locations and past arguments between characters, it certainly makes you wonder, with your mind fills with speculation as to like what is causing this and how it might turn out even, because it is also kind of like what I would consider a AA game for its time. They didn't exactly have, Rockstar money. And now I believe Rockstar is paying them to redo or make sequels to the Max Payne series, so which they were also responsible for. And this is a hell of a departure from that, So all in all, great game, definitely worth playing. Again, it seems like a great prequel to, Alan Wake 2. I would say that it's one of the better PS3 era games. And but you can play it on modern consoles with better lighting, better effects, better controls, and ultimately just a nice cozy package on the PS4. I believe it's on sale right now with that Black Friday sale they got going on. But anyway, I don't know about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Alan Wake. I don't want any spoilers for Alan Wake 2, so if you do know them, please do not say anything. And I will see you guys in the next video. I believe I've got Modern Warfare 3 coming up, and I'm currently playing Assassin's Creed Mirage. I'm looking forward to giving you my impressions and thoughts on those as well. So I will see you guys in those videos, as well as my weekly vlogs here on my membership only channel on my YouTube channel. So I'll see you guys at that time. All right, later. Bye.